Hello, everyone, and welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for the last of today's events, Reconciliation, Reflections, and Realities with Ghislain Picard. We would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities to examine research questions and projects in development across the university. We are running today's event with live streaming to YouTube and Zoom, and when we open it up for questions and answers, we will let you know how you can participate in that. So, with that, it's now my pleasure to hand the mic over to Alan Vicaire, the Senior Advisor for the Office of Indigenous Directions.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We've had an amazing event so far. This morning was an engaging discussion, and just recently, we were so thankful to have Mano, Carol, Delbert, share their experiences of intergenerational, survivals, and also the experience of residential schools. And now it gives me great, pleasure to introduce our keynote and welcome Ghislain Picard. Mr. Picard is Innu from the community of Pessamit, and for more than 30 years, he served as the regional chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Quebec and Labrador. His career has always been amplifying Indigenous voices, from his early work in journalism and communications to his leadership and advocacy at the regional, national, and even international level. Since 2023, we've been very fortunate to have him here at Concordia as the Indigenous Governance Expert in Residence within political science, where he co-teaches, mentors students, and helps shape conversations about Indigenous politics and governance. Today, he's here to share reflections on reconciliation. What has changed in the decade since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report in the last 10 years? What still needs to be changed? And then how can we move forward? So please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Ghislain Picard.
That's my matcha tea. Much needed at this time of day. Thank you very much, Alan, for this introduction and very generous introduction. Kwejigidat no temet chep chbohadat no. Mlalden pshish with namanti bihman ka hagataji tsnochtayande de dayam shka hagande with the dayak magde wat to hanyak. Chatwe and Spadelden may inosi Itayagua Hagat, the wind stop Magotiana, Nodo de Kutsiozen, the ship to Lodaji, Spadel Magando. This is the decade of the indigenous languages. We're into the third year of that decade as proclaimed by UNESCO. So I think it's certainly a duty and an honor to be speaking my own language, the Ino Aimun. The first language I spoke when I was able to speak. Then French came second, and then much later in life, English joined. And I just wanted to stress the importance of these type of conversations. And I find that we don't have enough of them, not enough reminders. And certainly acknowledge the territory that we are on today, as is commonly known, Tiohtià:ke. And I see that one of the tunnels underneath us there's big writing on the wall about, land acknowledgement, and I think it's it's an honor for the land keepers and land guardians that we make the acknowledgement, and I think even more so here in Quebec, because land acknowledgement in some circles is not creates discomfort or malaise within some circles, and I find that to be very appalling that we would witness that, and I remember some years ago, after the tragedy in Joliet that took the life of Joyce Echaquan, that the federal government of that day quickly mobilized and organized national sessions involving Canada, of course, but also provincial and territorial governments. And at one of those meetings, I participated, so did the current Minister of Indigenous Affairs in Quebec, Mr. Lafrenière. Every single minister, including Canada and the provincial and territorial ministers, started with a land acknowledgement, except Mr. Lafrenière. And I made it a point after to give him a call. I said to him, well, you're not my minister. I said, but I still felt embarrassed to be in that position to witness, that kind of a denial. And I said, I think one must know that this is strictly protocol, and that needs to be respected. As stated earlier, I go back many years to my community, and I was very privileged to be able to grow up in a setting where the Innu language was the common language. And to this day, our community is roughly about over 4,000 people. And I could say that a good 55 to 60% of our people still speak Innu, which, considering the state of Indigenous languages in this country, is a fairly good average. I will add to that one of the nations in Quebec, the Atikamekw Nation, has the highest rate of Atikamekw language speakers, Indigenous language speakers in the country. So that's certainly something to applaud and be thankful for. And the Atikamekw Nation is Cree community, a small nation, but yet they've been able to remain, kept some of their wealth in terms of Indigenous languages. I have a class later on today. It's going to be my third week, and I share that responsibility with a former minister in Quebec, Mr. Jeff Kelly, and we made a run at it last year. It was very insightful and rich in terms of the experience itself. And the title of the class is State and Indigenous Peoples Relations. Where are we at? So it doesn't say much, but it says so much at the same time. And so we have a second group this year, 22, I believe, students. And we had our first initial meeting 2 weeks ago. Young men and women who are very, very much knowledgeable about the situation, which obviously, if you compare the situation today with that of 25 years, 30 years ago, is remarkable in terms of how our young people have been able to put down those barriers and learn about our peoples. But this said, are we in the position that we would like to be when it comes to reconciliation? I may be a little harsh, but I would say no. There's so much more to be done. From a society perspective, I think we've achieved so much in terms of, supporting that rapprochement between our peoples, more understanding about, where our people come from, where they're at, the kind of challenges that they face, the kind of hurdles that they have to battle along the way, and how much they're trying to secure their future as peoples. In 2012, I was in front of a crowd, my own crowd, the Innu people, back in Sept-Îles. And the issue at hand at the time was land, of course. And there was a lady who I've known for years. She was among the 150 people or so, and she was sitting at the very front. And after I finished my talk, which is rare, I mean, entirely in Innu, she raised her hand and says, I would like to ask a question to you. She said to me, and I'm not going to quote her, but essentially what she said is, when do we as people decide that we're finally where we are wanting to be? I think it's a very deep and profound, observation. And the best answer I could provide to her is, well, listen, I said, I've been asking myself the same question. I guess it's a sort of a reflection as to where we come from and the kind of challenges that we face as peoples, and how do we secure that future. And with that question comes the issue of process. How do we secure the conditions or the right conditions in order for a process to respond to what we expect as peoples? I decided after a long reflection last fall that this political life was the end for me, and I finally made my decision known to chiefs just before Christmas. Not as a present, but that's that was the right time to do it. And then so on December 19, I sent an email to all chiefs and said, well, this is where it stops for me. And after so many months, it's still very much, it still weighs heavy in my heart, in my soul. And just last week, the provincial premier introduced his appointees, the new ministers, and I happened to see a picture of my successor, Francis Véro-Paul, in the crowd. And, as I did before, I would expect him to be invited to these events because it is protocol. And when I saw that picture, I told myself, this is exactly what I'm not missing. And I say this because obviously, the decision didn't come easy, but there comes a time when the issues become too personal. When you feel it in your heart, you say, well, maybe it's time for somebody else to carry on with the fight and the battles. And at the same time, after so many years of, trying to respect protocol, I got tired of, the convention. And to me, this is where I guess you have to be true to yourself, first of all, and true to the people that you are called to serve. So I didn't, share all of those things to the chiefs, of course. And to me, there was some markers in my recent past that really helped me to reflect and make the right decision. Joyce Echaquan, of course, in 2020, and I could go back as far as what was the so-called Oka crisis back in 1990, and see how events over the years have really shaped the kind of person I am, the kind of person that I guess I wanted to be in a capacity to serve not only the peoples, but the cause itself. And so it definitely takes a toll on anyone. And I said to myself, okay, this is the time to turn the page and then open up a new chapter. So this is what I've been doing for the past few months. And as stated by Alan earlier, close association with Concordia University. Actually, it goes back, the initial discussions way before COVID with Manon and her team, and then with the dean as well, and then we finally picked up things after COVID, and more recently in 2022, 23, and I mean I enjoy this, and for the first time in maybe 30 years plus, I finally managed to stop compromising on my principles. I'm in a better position now to advance what I think is right. And I just want to make sure you understand what I mean by that. It's not so much, a compromise, as a matter of, being negative or defeatist, but more or less a compromise in order to advance the principles of others. And I've always paid much respect for the diversity that we represent as peoples, 10 different nations in Quebec, and excluding the Inuit, of course, but with whom we had relations as well over the years. But we have very distinct peoples, not only because of the language, French and English, but also cultures and socio-economic, specifics for our peoples. And you agree to, carry that responsibility, understanding that you have to pick up from each and every one of those nations and communities. So that's what I did for over 30 years, 32 years to be exact, and with a couple of years as a learning experience in politics with my peoples. So, and this is what I told my class 2 weeks ago. I said, I don't hold the truth for everything. And what I share is really what I seen, what I heard, and what I observed over the years. And because I have the capacity, then obviously I have an opinion. And this is still to this day where I stand. I can go back to the constitutional discussions after 1982. The failed process of securing the full meaning of what it is to have a indigenous autonomous government, and how jurisdictions around the table failed to address the issue the way our people expected it to be addressed. So I was privileged to have a front row seat, in those proceedings, although I was not involved politically, but I also had the responsibility of, carrying the news for our people. So I feel privileged 40 years later, to be able to reflect on those chapters. And they are definitely defining moments in the history of Indigenous peoples, not only in this province, but also in the country and internationally. So I was very privy to be able to witness everything that I've seen and heard, over the years. And I think very quickly, I've been able to put up, a challenge for governments to take on. And I've always, sometimes I feel maybe I wasn't born in the right era, because I'm very, very truly, nationalist, in the true sense of the word, meaning that first and foremost, it's the Innu nation, my nation. That's what comes first. And, with all due respect, to peoples who hold, very key position in government, and of course, I can refer to, the more recent appointment of Mandy Galmasti as Minister for Indigenous Services Canada. Mandy, a good friend, a person that I respect very much, but what I sense is that there's always this hope that at some point we'll be able to change the system, which I don't really believe in. If anybody can prove me wrong, you're welcome, more than welcome. But and the reason, maybe it's too, simple in the way that I'll put it, but to me, the system was never meant for us to be in it. It's a system that really tried to eradicate our peoples. So to me, there needs to be a profound change in the relationship. And I don't think reconciliation can achieve that unless our peoples are committed and determined, to set up their own governance system. And we have those. We know where we come from. We know what drives our people. And we know that the road and the road and journey to reconciliation is a tough one. It's a long road. But I think that this needs to happen. I was started getting interested in the difference that I've seen from our peoples with the majority around us back in 1967, in my early teen years, and where there was so much publicity around Expo 67 and the fact that this international exhibition was going to have an Indian pavilion. We were called Indians back then, still. And to me, it says a lot about what could be termed as the birth of an Indian movement, for lack of a better word. And from 67, we moved on to 69, the white paper. And from 69, the white paper, we moved on to the red paper. And I think this is where the Indian movement, as we called it then, started to take shape to this day. But that's been already more than 60 years. And to me, we need to, at some point, take stock of where we come from and the kind of challenges that we've faced. We've won some, we've lost many. And this is what I think we need to evaluate where we're at today. That's why I say today, we probably have as many definitions of reconciliation as we have people in the room today. So if it's true for us, it's true for government as well. And every time Mr. Lafrenière comes up to the mic and, does his thing and, reflects on reconciliation, I know there are people working behind him, his speech, his keynote, and say, okay, this is the right place to put the word. And, over the years, I tried, to reflect on, the diversity that I spoke of earlier with our nations and chiefs and communities, and I've always told chiefs, well, sometimes I said, don't leave me improvising. How you feel, what you think, and where we should be going. I said, because that's the most uncomfortable position to put myself in. Don't have me double guessing, what you want. But I said, at the very least, what I understand my responsibility to be is really to secure those conditions so that, governments will pay respect with, what you defend. And it's been tough. And just that piece adds to, I guess, that helps in making the decision to, leave it all behind at some point. But it's been a few months of quasi-retirement, I guess I would put it. And I keep busy with Concordia. I'm also at HEC Montreal as an associate professor. I also have 2 files with Hydro-Quebec, very key files. One that deals with the announcement by Quebec and Newfoundland late last year about the launch of other phases, new phases, renewed phases of Churchill Falls in Labrador. I'm a quasi-negotiator, I guess would be the best way to put it. And one of the positions that we advance in trying to engage Hydro-Quebec on the proper footing is the fact that the Innu Nation in Quebec wasn't asked when in 1927 they drew that line separating Newfoundland or Labrador from Quebec. That's your doing. We have nothing to do with it, but it has impact on us, on our traditional land, which we call Nitassinan. And so we present our case to Hydro-Quebec and its representatives, and there's nothing to be said because it's not really at their level. It's really at the level of the government they respond to. But we said to them, the era of compromise has to stop somewhere. And this is why we advance the positions that we advance. And this is one of the examples that I'm providing to you today to say, well, I'm almost tempted to say, well, this is a new me, but it's not a new me. It's always been there. But, for a few decades in my life, I had to, put aside my deep and profound principles in order to advance the well-being of the collective. I took that responsibility very seriously. Speaking of reconciliation, of course, one has to reflect on TRC and its call to actions, 94 calls to action back in 2015. And I remember reading a report from the Yellowhead Institute in 2023. At that time, only 13 out of 94 had been delivered. So there remains about 80 plus calls to action if we haven't moved on any of them since then for the past 2 years. So it would take another maybe 40 years to 50 years to be able to deliver on 94 calls to action. And I will add to that the calls to action from the Viens Commission the report that was presented back in 2019. One of the recommendations called for the Office of the Ombudsperson, Protecteur du Citoyen in Quebec, which was mandated through one recommendation to oversee the implementation of the recommendations. They presented a report in 2023 opposing the conclusions of the Quebec government, because Quebec at that time claimed that they had advanced on at least 2/3 of the recommendations. The conclusions by the ombudsperson was 1/3. And they added to that when it comes to Indigenous peoples in this province, the government has no plan. And I think it's very key in terms of how, the issues pertaining to our peoples are taken seriously. And I would put some blame to the media as well in the way that coverage is being provided when it comes to our issues. I find that at times our issues are being dealt with the same way that you'll deal with the rate of unemployment, up and down, or the state of the healthcare system. And I rarely saw a reporter or a journalist go deep into addressing some of the issues that we address. Why is title still a reality in this province? What's the meaning of Supreme Court decision when it comes to consultation? Why do Indigenous people claim that this is unceded territory? Nobody, in the media, although they have a power to influence, nobody in the media will go deep into the questions. And to me, that's not helpful. After Oka in 1990, after Wounded Knee in 1973, after Joyce Echaquan in 2020, it seems like, and this is helping, I guess, the political circles, in the sense that we quickly go back to business as usual. And that's exactly what I've seen back in the 80s, when I was able to observe the constitutional discussions. I remember like it was yesterday, one of the leaders of that day, Jim Sinclair, pointing to all premiers around the table and putting a blame on them for the failure of the process. And I remember quite clearly that 2-3 days later, for those premiers, it was business as usual. And I think it's a really, a very clear demonstration as to the importance of Indigenous issues in this country. But luckily, we are resilient, we're determined, and we've made so much more gains at the international level, with the UN adopting the UN DRIP back in 2007, and the fact that we have now a law in place in this country that recognizes UN DRIP. Although, at this point today, it might seem a little unclear as to how the current federal government would like to address this issue. So I think mobilization has, is definitely, well, I'm hoping it's here to stay. We have, well, expert in residence is, maybe it's putting the bar a little too high for me, for the reasons I explained earlier. So I take the liberty of inviting experts in different areas. We have a person from Kahnawake who was privileged to be at the negotiating table for the International Treaty on Plastic Pollution back in July. And of course, that process failed as well. And she will be attending one of our classes in the coming weeks to explain, the process and, her role in it. And so I think we still managed to cover as much as we can on all fronts. And to me, it's still very much, I'm still very much optimistic about the future, despite the fact that the examples I have provided may not seem to reflect that. And I remain optimistic because the people I see, the people I hear, the people I talk to are very much determined that things have to change. I'll explain why I said earlier that maybe I wasn't born in the right era or at the right time. And going back to how I qualify the system and the fact that the system is not for us, is before I left office, I tried to secure a process where peoples would say, well, if they have a capacity to create their own institutions, such as the National Assembly, then we should have that capacity as well to unite as peoples and determine what is the kind of structure that we need. And, I guess level up in that way, where we could create our own, constitutional body, if you will, while we respect the, specificity of each nation and each community, and then make sure that the National Assembly, not only the government, but all the elected individuals address the issues that we feel need to be addressed. And I think, it presents one way of, advancing our issues. The Sami people in Scandinavia has managed to advance that as well, within their own reality. So did the Maori in New Zealand and other nations across the world. So if it's possible for them, then it's certainly possible for us. So to me, and again, I want to stress the fact that, because it is important, the reconciling ourselves as peoples, while we respect our specificity as Indigenous peoples in this province, in this country, I think the response has been very positive in light of what I've witnessed over the years, and I think we need to stay that course, because it's also about human relationships, outside of the challenges presented by the ever-changing political environment. But one thing that I often refer to, and maybe I will conclude with that, because I think it's very important, is the fact that people, non-Indigenous people, will have to understand that the first and probably foremost condition in order for reconciliation to happen is to acknowledge the fact that we have to be reconciling with ourselves as Indigenous peoples, and put behind the shame, and the loss of dignity, and to me that's what I call healing. And we are all faced with that reality as peoples, where we need to achieve healing the way that we intend to achieve it. And I find that non-Indigenous people have to understand that part. It's probably the most important chapter in our lives, to be able to finally turn that page, not forget about the past, but be in a position to forgive and move on And to me, the collective reconciliation that people often speak about, in my view, is conditioned by that as well. Thank you very much.
For those of you here, you can just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. But if there's any questions online, you can feel free to use the virtual hand and we'll call on you, or you can type your questions into the chat and we'll read them out loud. Do we have any questions in the space? I see one here.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. This might be a very naive question. It's a genuine question. I also listened again to some of the last 10 years of discussions on the TRC and the specifically 62 to 65 in education last night. And you spoke about the particularity of Quebec, and I know that there have been critiques that it's also at a very governmental level and that there are other protocols that people should be considering. And I wondered whether you could speak a bit to the particularity of Quebec, the calls, and maybe some particularities that you see as interventions.
Well, one thing I could do is refer back to, to me, the prime example presented by, the land acknowledgement. And there are people who, are in a position to influence the public debate, who take the liberty of, how shall I put it, to putting the lowest denominator in terms of the positions that we carry and we defend. And, I'm thinking of some names, but I won't tell you, what they are. But I think at the same time, my observation is almost strictly political. But at the same time, and I look to Concordia, I look to HEC. HEC, has supported this initiative, for First Nation executive education for the past 4 years. We're moving into the 5th year, and at the same time, we're trying to, push the horizon further and say what else can we do? And one of the things I've shared with the HEC is, we're strongly supportive of this initiative, but we don't want it to be like a ghetto within the institution, if you understand, what I'm trying to say. I said, isn't there a way for HEC to feed into FNEE, First Nation Executive Education, and make sure that it goes both ways, that we can also offer something to HEC. And I think that's really, this would be the true meaning of, decolonizing our institutions. And I think we've achieved some, in some capacity to do that within Quebec and the different institutions. I go back to, I think just 2 weeks ago, a few individuals graduated from a medical faculty specifically designed for Indigenous peoples, which has Université de Montréal, McGill University, Laval, and I think 2 more universities. And that program has been in place for almost 15 years. And I believe that close to 50 people have graduated since this program was introduced, from 14, 15 years ago. So we sort of, been in some capacity in the avant-garde, even before this whole issue of reconciliation came about or, became an issue of discussion. But I think more can be done. And we've seen that what I've seen is institutions kind of, not being sure as to how they should address it, or at times even stalling because how Indigenous issues are, are being analyzed and treated in the public space. And I go back to the way media, is managing, the coverage of those issues. And, I've said this before, sometimes, when, do we need for somebody to die, in order for our issues to be addressed? But, sadly, one has to come to that conclusion. And, do we need to put up arms in order for our issues to be addressed, like what we've seen in 1990? But, as quickly as we raise that question, that's how quickly we go back to, business as usual. And that's the sad part. But I think I would add to that, Bill 97 on the forestry regime, which has been, a very concerning issue for First Nations, that depend on forestry and the forest. And there again is a good example of, a government saying one thing and doing another. I've heard it so many times. I've heard the minister say, maybe, it's time for, not for you to adapt to our way of doing things, but for us to adapt to yours. But, it's more easily said than done. And that's what I experience. So, when I guess looking back, not only at this government, but in previous governments as well, it seems like no matter, what the ideology is, one thing strikes me in terms of what, my understanding is and how these governments are acting and how they position themselves. It seems to me, and I go back to the Constitution because I often refer to that era and what I had seen then, is the fact that there are only there can only be so many orders of government in this country. There's no room for an Indigenous order of government. To me, it's, how do you say that? It's as clear as mud. And that's, that's what I see. And one of the comments, one of the most striking comments after the failure of the constitutional process back in the late 80s, I believe it was 87, I'm not even speaking about Charlottetown in 92, was that the real issue here is one of power and one of land and resources. And when I look at all of the issues that I've seen, come before me over the years, at the end of the day, that's really what comes up. The fact that we are so limited in terms of capacity to be developing nations as Indigenous nations, and the fact that our capacity to be self-governing is also unrecognized or denied. I don't think there's, there are many examples, and the one that comes to mind is the fact that a federal law, C-92, recognized the capacity of our peoples to be developing and implementing their own laws. That has to do with childcare in this case. Quebec, I'll give them that, they were really upfront back in 2019. And they said to us, we will challenge that law because we feel that it's not up to Canada, to make that determination. It's really our responsibility as a province. And I remember meeting with 3 ministers just a few days before Christmas in 2019. And what we told them at that time is that I said, well, you're not challenging Canada. You're challenging us, in exercising that capacity. So they went to court. The issue went all the way to the Supreme Court after the Court of Appeal in Quebec had decided that, Canada didn't infringe on their responsibility. And at the end of the day, this was, 4 years later in 2023, in February, the Supreme Court rendered a decision in our favor, saying, well, there are probably as many interpretations as we have lawyers, but they said, well, Quebec lost its case. And so as a result, during the proceedings, we had at least one community that decided to develop and apply their own law regarding childcare. And since the decision, another community has gone that route as well. And we had said at the time that, we're hoping that all communities will join in. Well, obviously, it's, childcare is a very challenging issue in all of the communities. And one of the communities has the largest daycare because of the demographics in the province. Largest daycare in the province, whether you talk of municipalities or Indigenous communities. So I think it tells much about the kind of challenges that we face as jurisdictions.
I have two questions. Thank you for your presentation. First question is pretty straightforward. Can new faculty come and join your class? sit in as a fly on the wall, because it sounds super interesting and it sounds like we could learn a lot, or at least I could learn a lot.
Well,
I won't put you on the spot. Okay, so I'll just go into my second question.
I'll defer the question to Manu.
Maybe I'll find a way to become a fly on the wall in your class if at all possible. But seriously, my question was about, you had alluded to UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and I know there's a longer history about how slow Canada was. It was blocked by the Harper government, and then the new previous Trudeau government, the previous Liberal government, finally ratified it. And I'm coming from so-called British Columbia, where the province decided to create its own interpretation. So it was called DRIPA, right? It's a strange acronym, but DRIPA, Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. So, but what we've seen now with this trade war that's taking place, initiated south of the border, is this whole push for these mega projects, which, given some of the history that you talked about, it sounds like it's come up a lot, right, in the past. And, can go back to the railway, I suppose, as the first mega project that was sort of steamrolled across the country. But with the current push for mega projects all over the place, what do you foresee happening, at least here, closer to this part of, I know one of the projects that was shortlisted was apparently in the Port of Montreal, but it's from what I've been hearing from across the country with different First Nations, and it seems like these bills have the number 5 in them, right? I don't know, C5 or X5 or whatever. But these kinds of initiatives really are seeming to be ignoring free, prior, and informed consent, which comes from DRIPA. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on those kind of mega projects.
Well, on the second question, I think I read an opinion piece very recently whereby, and I think it really reflects what you just said, is the fact that C5 is really opposing, C15 in the way that we seem to be, there seems to be a clear oversight in terms of UN DRIP and its 46 articles, including those, of course, of free prior informed consent. And this is what I understand has been advanced by leadership across the country. But I think there are different, forces at play here, even within the Indigenous community. Looking at the diversity that we see, from province to the next, and you're totally right, regarding BC. I mean, BC has been in the avant-garde, in terms of adopting its own law, proposing the implementation of UNDRIP back in 2019, 2 years before Canada. But I know BC has also its challenges, from that time, that's still very much, I guess, sort of color the debate, currently. So I have been a little out of touch of the reality of, the day, but I understand, from what I'm hearing from my, my successor, that it's still very much a challenge even in BC. We have C5 that's been rushed and now adopted. We've had the National Bureau for Major Projects of National Interest, see the day. We've had a CEO appointed, and we know where she comes from. And we've had more recently a list of those projects, including the expansion of the ports not far from here. And what we were expecting is, okay, Churchill Falls overlaps 2 jurisdictions, Quebec and Newfoundland. And so we are still very much, expecting at some point that project might be part of that list to be at some point completed. So we're trying to, in a way, play on all fronts, in a way secure those positions that I said we advanced earlier in my presentation, and at the same time calling on Canada, to play its role. Because in this case, we have a province that, speaking of Quebec, that has adopted 2 motions at the National Assembly. The first one in 2019, the second one more recently this past spring, where they're committed to sitting down with First Nations and Inuit to negotiate the terms of the implementation of UN DRIP in this province. In the same manner that C-15 was adopted in 2021, but we're still, trading much since then for a number of reasons. So we send messages to Carney and his team of ministers saying, I think you people have to see something. We don't like the word, but you are still the crown, and you are still a fiduciary for First Nations people in this country. You have a responsibility. You have an obligation. We don't say it, the courts say it. And so this is, the kind of positions that we advance, although I'm not so much a political lobbyist. Nevertheless, I still have a responsibility. And so far, it's been total silence. So that's when you begin to worry, when you don't hear a response, or you don't hear, at the very least, a reaction. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you say to yourself, well, it's all too familiar. Here you are being on your own again. And at some point, we'll provide the analysis to our leaders and say, well, these are the options we have. It's really up to you, because it's in their hands. We're not elected. We're just, spokespersons for the leadership. So the decision is really in their hands. And to me, Churchill Falls is major. It's major because it affects, our Innu Nation, which, by the way, is, divided by this, artificial border, because the Innu Nation, it's 2 communities on the Labrador side 9 communities on the Quebec side. The only difference is we have the same language. The only difference is, they have English as a second language, and we have Français, French on this side. So it's a lot of obviously politics at play even within our communities. But I think we need to present, the issues as we see them. And the one example that comes to mind, I take you back 50 years. The premier of that day promoted a project in James Bay on the basis that their thinking was that the land was unoccupied, until they were reminded by an injunction that they should go back to the drawing board and do things the right way. So we said, as part of the options that we present at some point to our leaders, we say, well, maybe again, whether we like it or not, and maybe, the last recourse. And that's the, that's the story or the history of the judicial process in this country. You try to secure those conditions to be able to sit down, on the same footing as governments. And then you conclude that, it's not going to happen. So you set the clock, backwards and say, well, let's start over again. And then ultimately you find yourself in the same position. So after, attempting to set those right conditions, you finally conclude that it's not going to happen. And so the courts are, the ultimate recourse. We don't want to go there because it costs money, it takes time. And what happens in the years that it will take the Supreme Court to render a decision. So it's very sensitive and delicate for leadership to say, well, I'll put all my eggs in that basket, of the justice system, because as much as it can be in your favor, it can favor the other side as well. Should never forget that too. As for the class, well, I'll raise that question tonight.
Do we have any other questions in the audience or online? Okay, well, I'll hand it over to Alan. Just another round of applause. Thank you so much. Mr. Ghislain Picard is one of our experts in residence here at Concordia, and we're very lucky to have him.
Thank you very much, Alan. Yeah. Merci, Manon.
Perfect. Okay, well, let me just say something. Okay. Thank you, Joanne. UCS. Manon and I just want to say just a few closing words, and then we'll bring up Jean to close up. But we wanted to both thank Peter Gossage and also Kobe Goda for this morning, and the Department of History, Department of Religion and Culture for organizing an amazing SCVK as well, an amazing panel and discussion and presentations. We really appreciated that. This afternoon, Manon, Delbert, and Carol for bringing their personal stories to the conversation, and obviously then Ghislain Picard for sharing us this insightful keynote. And then lastly, Douglas, Birdie, Jacqueline, the Force Space team, like every time when we have an event here, thank you for your team. Thank you for putting this all together, because this is what makes it a success. And I'll let Manon say a few words.
I think Alan has said it all, really, except one thing. We have to thank Alan, because Alan was like basically, right? I mean, he wasn't necessarily at the forefront of the activity, but he is the person that organized almost everything behind this with the help of the Fourth Space team and the help of Peter and, a whole bunch of people from the Department of History and Religion and Culture. So, like, a big thank you to Alan for organizing this in a seamless way, it would seem, it's always been a pleasure and an honor to work with them on a daily basis, so thank you. And we've basically reached the end of our event, but before we send you all home, I want to introduce our elder, Jean Stevenson, to come and offer us some closing words. Thank you.
My name is Jean Stevenson. I'm originally from Manitoba. My parents are from Penguins First Nation, and I'm from the Wolf Clan, and my Canadian is Ghislain and Easter. So I just want to share my thoughts with the creator of this day. So I would like to give thanks for everyone here that spoke and worked and shared and asked questions and listened and observed and took in and like everything that we take in, we're going to share it with other people too. So it's spreading awareness and helping each other to learn more, to understand more. So I give thanks for this opportunity for all of us to be here, whether we're here in person or virtually, that we have like learned something good, and whether what it does, it helps us to think, and when our mind thinks, it helps us to grow and to be to open to other possibilities that come. So I'm thankful for the creator that we have that mind to learn, and that we have a body that brings us where we need to go, and that we have good energy, spiritual energy, and we have emotions that we share through our laughter, through our tears, or through our words, our songs. All the things that the Creator gave us through our body, mind, and spirit. Give thanks for that, for being human beings. And I give thanks for our ancestors, the ones that walked before us and that have suffered great tribulations, but they also suffered, they didn't suffer in vain. So we're here to carry forward to have a better future for our children. Which Albert spoke about a lot about our future generations coming. So I want to give thanks for the ones that went to the spirit world, our loved ones, that we care so much about and we think about them often. And we are here in a physical form, and they've gone on, but they still live in our hearts, and we will always love them. And I want to give thanks for Mother Earth, Father Sky, Grandmother Moon, Grandfather Sun, Star Nation, the sacred water, the sacred fire, all the plants, the animals, the minerals, everything on Earth. I like to say everything that's under the Earth, on the Earth, and above the Earth. So it encompasses our planet Earth, and also the Milky Way. So we are just a speck of we're not that important when it comes down to it, but we think we are. So we just go forth with trying to be a good person. Like my husband, he talks about kindness all the time, and that is a good reminder for us all to be kind to one another and to have love in our hearts and to just accept our differences and look for the similarities. So yes, we are from different areas, different languages, different cultures, but we have something similar. And so let's focus on that. It's very important today. And we give thanks for the children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and the ones that haven't been born yet, but they're coming. So we give thanks for them. And in everybody's heart, there is something maybe that you're yearning for, or that you would like to be healed, or that you want to be taken care of in a good way. So we send forth those prayers to the Creator that it can happen that way for you. And that we will be feeling good after this, our time together, and that I give thanks for the residential school survivors, the ones that didn't make it, the ones that are still here. And I give thanks for the truth. The name of this is honoring truth, reflecting on impact. And I believe that people shared their truth today and it impacted us, and we're going to be wiser because of it. And I just give thanks for all that is, and for this evening together, and for our medicine, and everything that is there that I couldn't think of. I say thank you for that. Black celebration.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for all of you who came into ForSpace today. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Peter. Thank you to all of our wonderful speakers and anyone who has shared today. Just a reminder that all of the conversations that you heard today are already available on our YouTube channel if you want to revisit or share them. So thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we hope to see you again here soon. Thank you.